Today we'll be talking about decision making and creativity, Chapter 6. Decision making is the conscious process of making choices among alternatives with the intention of moving towards some desired state of affair. Creativity refers to the development of original ideas that make a socially recognized contribution. So usually when we think of decision making, we think of a process that's kind of restrictive and a process that requires or involves your analytical portion of your brain. And when we think of creativity, we think of a more free-flowing, non-restrictive process that requires the creative portion of your brain. So when evaluating decision making and creativity in the organizational management behavior class, we understand that companies can benefit a great deal from employees having a perfect balance of decision making abilities as well as imputing creativity in those decision making processes. So the rational choice decision making process consists of 6 steps. And it's important to look at these steps as working together. So step 1 through 6 will take you closer to filling or narrowing the gap of either a problem or an opportunity that you might have. And so each step will be discussed later on in the presentation, but first I'm just going to give you a general synopsis of steps 1 through 6. So the first step in the process is to identify the problem or recognize the opportunity. The second step involves choosing how to process the decision. The third step is to identify and develop a possible list of solutions. The fourth step is to choose the alternative with the highest subjective expected utility. And step 5 requires you to implement the selected alternative. And step 6 requires that you evaluate whether the gap has been narrowed between what is and what it ought to be. Under the first step of the rational choice decision-making process, you must first be able to identify the problem or an opportunity. When you're referring to a problem, we're looking at the deviation or the difference between the current situation and our desired situation. And so we understand that a deviation is a fundamental root cause that needs to be correct. So let's, for example, say that I'm a CEO of a sneaker company who recently experienced a decline in the number of sales as a result of a decline in retailers that were selling my shoes. So, of course, that's a problem because I am not receiving the amount of sales that I would usually receive had I had the amount of retailers on my side selling my shoes. So, what is a problem? Well, of course, we understand that a problem occurs when there is a difference between what we currently have and what we desire. And an opportunity is that deviation between the current expectation and a potential for a better situation. So, as a CEO of the sneaker company, I could potentially identify, of course, the problem, but it's important for me to be able to also identify the opportunity. And so, with the decline in retailers selling my shoes, I could potentially, let's say, go to internet or online sales, or selling the shoes myself, or finding other retailers. Step 3 requires that we identify and develop a list of possibilities. After consulting proper parties that can provide the most accurate and effective information to formulate a strong list of possibilities, it's important that we evaluate exactly what those possibilities are using the information that we have gained. So, as a sneaker CEO, I may very well want to consult the production manager or the distribution manager to understand what exactly was the result of the failure or decline in retailers and what potentials or possibilities we have as a company. So, after there's a list of possibilities formulated, you would want to compare all the possibilities. So you want to go to step 4, which requires you to choose the alternative with the highest subjective expected utility. And we already discussed the subjective expected utility, and we discussed it in its maximum capacity earlier. The last two steps are sort of self-explanatory. In step 5, you want to implement the selected alternative. In step 6, you want to evaluate whether the gap has been narrowed between what is and what it ought to be. And because you will put to use what you've selected, hopefully you've narrowed the gap between what is and what it ought to be. If not, you would proceed to step 1 and go through the process again, and your focus is narrowing down so that you can narrow that gap. So, why do people differ from rational choice paradigms when identifying the problems or opportunities? And there are 5 widely recognized concerns, and those concerns consist of stakeholder framing, mental models, decisive leadership, solutions-focused problems. And so when we're talking about stakeholders framing, we're discussing the influence that an organization has on its manager's attention. So basically, the stakeholders are actively managing information so it becomes less conspicuous. So the next concern is the mental models. And so the mental models are basically your mental perception of the world around you or the outside world and how you perceive that outside world. And so one great example is similar to working as a group or working in a group. Our own perceptions, our own external perceptions of the world around us kind of make us blind to certain problems or create kind of a unique blindness. And so that's something to keep in mind when determining or looking at the uh, difference between the rational choice paradigm and how people actually identify problems and concerns. So, the rational choice paradigm provides that people rely on logic to evaluate choices and alternatives. However, in reality, people participate in what's called bounded rationality because they process limited and imperfect information and rarely select the best choice. There are several assumptions that the rational choice paradigm makes when regarding the human mind, which are one is the decision maker can process information about all alternatives and consequences, which we understand is not necessarily so. So let's say you have a implicit favorite, as the book discusses. You have an apple and you have an orange. And let's say you just favor oranges. So, in making your choice or evaluating the alternatives, you may unconsciously say, I don't really like apples. They're nasty. They have worms. But that is an implicit favorite that you favor and prefer oranges over apples. Therefore, your decision is affected by your personal preference. An employer's emotions or intuition can impact the decision making process. The book highlights 3 ways. One way is that emotions from early preference which means that a person attaches a particular emotion or feeling about information for an alternative or prefers an alternative that is strongly influenced by an initial emotional marker. The second is emotions change the decision evaluating process. The third is emotions serve as information when we evaluate alternatives. And so when we think about intuition, intuition is our ability to know when a problem or opportunity exists and select the best choice of action with conscious reasoning. And so in intuition, you have both an emotional experience and a rapid unconscious analytical process occurring. So, of course, emotions impact employees, but we have seen that employees benefit from involvement. So, uh, when we look at employee involvement, we look at it on three levels: a low level, a moderate level, and a high level. A low level is asking the employee information. So let's say your boss comes to you and he just wants to know, hey, since you're selling sneakers, how many sneakers are we selling in a month? That's a low level. A moderate level is employees are told that the problem is occurring and they want them to make a recommendation to the decision maker. So the CEO in our sneaker example would go to an employer and ask specifically, um, what recommendations do you have? We're losing retailers. What type of recommendations do you have so that we can produce more sneakers or potentially gain more retailers? A high level decision uh, or high level involvement of the decision making process means that the employee would have more of a complete hands on in deciding and determining what process or what steps should be taken to fix the problem. Benefits to employee involvement mean improved decision quality by recognition of the problem. They include the number of quality solutions, so basically two heads are better than one, and improves the evaluation alternatives. So, of course, teamwork makes the dream work, but there are four contingencies that affect the ultimate level of employee involvement, and those are decision structures, source of decision knowledge, decision commitment, and risk of conflict. So, those are some things to keep in mind that kind of work counter to the benefit of employee involvement. When we think about employees, we think about creativity, or when we think about the decision making process, like I said earlier, you can include creativity into your decision making process. And so, creativity is the development of original ideas that make a socially recognizable contribution. So when we're looking at what makes a creative employee, we find four characteristics that make a creative person, which are persistence, subject knowledge and experience, cognitive and practical intelligence, and independent imagination. And so when we're looking at persistence, we're looking at the optimism of a person. What makes a person look at a glass and see it half full instead of half empty? When we're looking at the experience, we're looking at their mindful or mindless behavior. What sufficient experience does this person have? When we're looking at imagination, we're evaluating the person's high response to openness. Not only do we evaluate what makes a creative person, but we want to look at what makes a creative workplace. And as you can see in this picture, nap time would definitely be a plus in um, making for a more creative workplace, but that's not in the book. Some things that nurture a creative workplace include maintaining a learning oriented culture, ensuring jobs so you don't have to worry about whether or not you're going to have a job one day to the next. Ensuring and aligning employees are competent or have competencies, encouraging open communication, giving employees sufficient resources, ensuring that employees experience a comfortable degree of job security, and create non-traditional workspaces like the one you see in this picture.